test pilot from the French Test Pilot School. His last assignment while in service was as Assistant Chief of Integrated Staff, where he was in charge of prospective planning and force structure of the services. He writes for leading national newspapers and professional journals. His core interests concern air power and strategic affairs. A distinguished fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies, New Delhi, Air Vice Marshal Bahadur is presently working on his book Coercion and Air Power.
Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, YSM SM. He is the current General Officer Commanding in Chief, Army Training Command, RTRAC. General Shukla has been a research fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis and a visiting fellow at the Center of Land Warfare Studies. He has commanded an infantry brigade in counterinsurgency operations and an infantry division in the Kashmir Valley along the line of control. He is a qualified aviator and has flown along the borders of Sikkim and in the northeast.
Brigadier Naveen Mahajan was commissioned into the 2nd Dobras. Besides other courses, he is a graduate of Staff College, Camberley, UK, and Comprehensive Security Response to Terrorism course from Asia Pacific Center of Security Studies, Hawaii. He has had a highly operational service record ranging from LC, counterinsurgency, counterterrorism operations, to armored and mechanized warfare in plains and obstacle-ridden terrain. He was defense attaché to Myanmar at a time which saw significant improvement in Indo-Myanmar defense relations and also at the time of manifestation of China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. Currently, the officer is commanding a brigade in the western sector.
Brigadier Gaurav Mishra is a serving Indian Army officer. He holds an MPhil degree in Defense and Strategic Studies from Punjab University, Chandigarh. He did his research fellowship from Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, IDSA, New Delhi. His service in different operational conditions speaks of his vast experience. He has served in mountain and desert terrain, counterinsurgency and counter-terrorist operations. He has also served as the military observer in the United Nations peacekeeping mission. He is presently commanding an infantry brigade along the western border of India. His research interests are China and Pakistan strategic affairs.
Moderating this panel is Lieutenant General Dipinder Singh Hooda. General Hooda is the former commandant under whom the 2016 surgical strike was conducted after the Uri terror attack. He is most prominently known for his views on Kashmir with a strong emphasis on human rights. With a career spanning 40 years, he has served on both the northern and the eastern borders of India. He has also served in the United Nations mission in Ethiopia and Eritrea, for which he was awarded the UNMEE medal.
We hand you over to you, sir, General Hooda, sir, to carry on the proceedings, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me express my pleasure at being at the Chandigarh Military Lit Fest. It's always a great place to be. And I think this topic that has been chosen is also very appropriate for what is happening today. Starting in May, we saw a very heavy buildup of Chinese army across the LAC in Ladakh. And then there were multiple intrusions at various border points in eastern Ladakh. To some of us, it was sort of immediately clear at that time that this incident is completely different from the past standoffs. The level of preparation with which the PLA had come, the strength of soldiers. I think the most distinguishing feature was the level of violence that accompanied the original intrusions. We hadn't seen this level of violence in past standoffs. What had happened even at Buklam, a standoff lasting more than 70 days. All this was unprecedented. What we were seeing in eastern Ladakh. It was also a big surprise to us as to why is the PLA doing it at this time when the whole world is struck with coronavirus. There apparently was no major sort of breakdown in India-China military ties or political ties or diplomatic ties. I know there is a bit of inherent tension in relations between India and China, but there wasn't anything, any large trigger that should have caused this to happen. And I don't know if this uncertainty about intentions of the PLA, of the Chinese government, also somehow guided our initial response, because our initial response was sort of an attempt to underplay the situation and try and resolve it politically, try and resolve it diplomatically, and that it could be peacefully resolved. Unfortunately, a month after the initial intrusions, we had the Galwan incident, which was the first loss of lives in after 1975. We are now into the 8th month. What we've seen is a continuing standoff. We've seen a counter response by India in the area of the Kailash range, in the Chishul sector, in the south bank of Pengong Tso. Winters has come, but it hasn't at all affected the sort of build-up and preparations by both sides. We've had a series of talks, political level, diplomatic level, military level talks, but somehow there seems to be very little progress that is happening on ground. So I think what we will discuss today in this panel is the past, present, and future. And I think all three are important. The past, to see what actions have been taken both by India and China. Are there some lessons to learn from it? Could we have responded better? Has China, by doing this, sort of overplayed its hand? What were their intentions? Some lessons could emerge from what is happening or what has happened in the past 8 months. We must also look at the present situation to see, is there a way forward? I mean, are we going to remain deadlocked like this? Is this a situation that we are going to continue to see over the next months and years with thousands of soldiers on both sides? Or is there some potential for a negotiated settlement that we could take forward? And finally, I think we need to look at the future. We are seeing China emerging as a major challenge to India. And therefore, what should be our diplomatic strategy? What should be our political strategy? What should be our military strategy to build up military capability so that as we go forward into the future, we are able to manage, not only manage, handle and tackle our relationship with China. Because ultimately what has happened in the past 8 months has given a completely new dimension to India-China bilateral ties. And so it's important as two large neighbors to see how we need to handle this challenge as we go forward. Now, to discuss these various aspects, I have a very distinguished panel. I'll not go again with the introduction. They've already been introduced. And it's my pleasure to be able to moderate this session. How we will go about the session is that I will give initially about 10 minutes to each speaker to give their opening remarks. And once opening remarks have been made, based on that, I will raise some issues. If there are questions from viewers, we could take some
Sound.
questions.
Sound please. Okay.
General Palak sir, can't hear you,
Yeah,
sir.
because there's something wrong. Technically, there's some problem. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Gaurav,
Yes, sir. Now,
Gaurav, can you start?
Yeah, I can start, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, gentlemen. Today I'm going to speak on China's strategy under Xi Jinping, its vision for the world order. How is it going to pan out, and what were the reasons? What happened in Ladakh, and is there something behind? And I shall cover these pertinent aspects on this issue. 15th June 2020, India and China engaged into a face-off in Galwan Valley in Ladakh, which is considered to be the deadliest, where 20 Indian soldiers, including a commanding officer, were martyred. As per the Week magazine, 35 Chinese soldiers also lost their lives. Since then, the situation has continued to remain tense along the LAC, both armies reinforcing their positions. Since 1962, if we see, India-China border has remained peacefully tense, without a bullet fired except the short and intense conflict in Natula in 1967. If we see the April 2013 standoff on the eve of Premier Li Keqiang's visit to India, which broke the pattern of peace and tranquility on the border. It was beginning of the phase which is marked by divergence, mistrust, and hostility in the relationship. The Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, that is BCDA, signed in October 2013, following the April 2013 military standoff, could not prevent an equally significant standoff in September 2014 during the President Xi Jinping's visit to India. The two incidents in quick succession came as a reminder that the existing CBMs were insufficient for reducing the border tension. So the moot question here is that despite efforts to keep the border peaceful, the LAC has remained far from peaceful. Rather, there has been a growing Chinese assertiveness along the border. I quote here German historian Frisch Fischer argument that Germany's entry into the World War I is attributable to country's dysfunctional domestic politics and not the polarized European politics. Going by this analogy, China's aggressive international behavior could be rooted deep into its domestic politics. So what could be the plausible reasons for this China's assertiveness? Is it confined to India-China border, or it's a global phenomena to fulfill China's dream? So let's see, what is China's dream? China nurtures the global ambition of developing a building shared future for the mankind, or as President Xi ascribes, community with a shared destiny. There is a tectonic shift in China's strategy, with the fifth generation leadership under President Xi desires to claim the global leadership and be at the center stage of the world, which is contrary to President Deng Xiaoping's enunciated 24-character strategy of hide your capabilities, bide your time, and never claim leadership. China is a rising power, which aims to challenge the dominant power USA and displace it from the top spot, while USA is tending to be reticent, focusing inwards to make America great again, while China is looking confident, assertive, and outwardly eager and willing to fill the leadership vacuum, ostensibly employing all instruments of international relations and comprehensive national power to pursue global aspirations. So what is China's dream? During the 19th Party Congress in 2017, President Xi reiterated, and I quote, "Remain true to our original aspirations and keep our mission firmly in mind. Hold high the banner of socialism, the Chinese characteristic, secure decisive victory in building a prosperous society in all respect. Strive for great success of socialism with Chinese characteristic for a new era, and work tirelessly to realize Chinese dream of national rejuvenation." The first sentinel goal to build the moderately prosperous society by wiping out poverty by 2021, when it celebrates the 100 years of founding of CPC, that is Communist Party of China. Second, and the more challenging goal is to turn China into a fully developed nation by 2049, when it celebrates the 100 years of establishment of People's Republic of China. So what is China's grand strategy to achieve all this dream? To fulfill the dream of national rejuvenation, China needs to have a sustained economic growth. And this is dependent on three pertinent facets: energy security, domestic stability, and strong military. To ensure energy security, it has been focusing to diversify sources of energy, engagement with various countries, including Central Asian republics, Africa, Latin America. Institute multiple means of transportation, and development of warm water ports in the Indian Ocean are one such facet. Develop technologies to employ multiple fuels, and propagating to develop polar maritime Silk Road. Domestic stability. China is extremely sensitive to any kind of domestic turbulence caused due to extraneous or internal reasons, which can have a potential to spread to the restive regions of Xinjiang and Tibet, and which could jeopardize China's rise. When you talk about strong military, why is it military that is required? Military has always been an instrument of China's statecraft for deterrence, coercion, compellence to achieve its objectives. As Richard Bissinger, an expert of China's military, says, China is not a hesitant, it will not be hesitant to use the force to resolve dispute or claim territories. President Xi, during this speech on the 90th anniversary of the PLA, resonates the similar thoughts, and I quote, China must step up the transforming its armed forces into a world-class military that is ready to fight and win wars. As our country will never compromise on defending sovereignty, no one should expect us to swallow the bitter fruit that which is harmful to our sovereignty, security, and development interests. Chinese people love peace, and we will never seek aggression or expansion, but we have the confidence to defeat all invasions. We will never allow any people, organization, or political party to split any part of Chinese territory from the country at any time in any form, and therefore the PLA must continue its modernization. The benchmark centenary goals for the PLA is to complete the mechanization by 2020 and military modernization by 2035, implying to achieve the regional dominance. By 2049, it wants to transform into a world-class military to achieve parity with US. Certain path-breaking military structural reforms which have taken place in since the time President Xi Jinping has taken over. Just to give a perspective, factorization, where the 7 military regions have been amalgamated into 5 theater commands based on threat. The weight of China's military modernization has been towards development of expeditionary capabilities, expansion of PLA Navy, Marine Corps, adding of the aircraft carrier. Second is already in the process, and by 2035, it plans to have 6 aircraft carriers. It has upgraded its second artillery force into a PLA rocket force, which controls the conventional and the nuclear missiles. Establishment of the strategic support force, which controls the cyber and the space warfare domain, is the epitome of this structural reforms. We could say this can be a major game changer, or as Chinese say, Shashojian, that is assassin's mace. Beijing's assertion is to define and designate a rightful place for China in the global order after the century of humiliation, and hence fulfilling the China's dream is the primary objective. It has a grand strategy to fulfill the China's dream. The strategy straddles on multiple tenets to define the global order, which is favorable to China, which could include economic diplomacy, economic coercion, military diplomacy, geodynamics, etc. I shall just dwell briefly at what it implies when we're talking about economic diplomacy. Sitting on a 3.5 trillion forex reserve, China aims to exploit the economic heft. BRI is one such flagship project which epitomizes President Xi's leadership and which has been enshrined in the party's constitution after the 19th Party Congress. Economic coercion, using economy as a tool to achieve the negotiation on Chinese terms. I would like to highlight here the China threatened to enforce economic sanction against South Korea when it agreed to deploy THAAD missile by US in South Korea. Hambantota port, handed over for 99 years lease to China, is one such example. Development and weaponization of island territories in South China Sea, establishment of overseas military base at Djibouti, deployment of a naval task force in the Gulf of Eden to escort UN convoys and shipping columns. Military diplomacy has taken to a next level. Conduct of joint military exercises, and there has been a certain increase in the number of military exercises, as these provide ample opportunity to showcase military hardware and demonstrate new technology and also achieve interoperability with the friendly foreign countries. Sale of military hardware and niche technologies to selected countries. Challenging the existing international system, protocols, and treaties. This is something very interesting, which is trying to define a new world order. Establishing new organizations where rules will be increasingly framed by China, which bolsters China's international position. Non-compliance to the verdict of Permanent Court of Arbitration in favor of Philippines, though China is a signatory to the treaty. Establishment of financial institutions like AIIB, that is Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, to operate on China's terms and conditions parallel to World Bank and IMF. Sovereignty claim and bolster China's position. Flying of Chinese strategic bombers over Taiwan and Japan airspace. Announcing the ADIZ, that is Air Defense Identification Zone in South and East China Sea. Development of island territories in the South China Sea, as I mentioned earlier. As per the known sources, China has reclaimed about 3,200 acres of land in the South China Sea in the last 10 years. An increased propensity of China-Pakistan collusive threat. The case of conflict leading to a two-front war remains rife. Before I conclude, I would like to just mention that China perceives India as an impediment to its regional and global aspirations. Hence, in order to contain China, it is likely to resort to manipulations of its neighbors. And what happened recently in Nepal could be one of the manifestations. It can employ the economic heft to sway India's neighbors to its favor, likely to keep the border alive, resulting in frequent standoff, and this is likely to continue in future as well. China claims to improve the trade deficit to India's favor may remain a lip service. Continued military support to Pakistan, unabated development of infrastructure under CPEC, regardless of India's concern for construction on the disputed territory. Block India's entry into NSG, that is the Nuclear Supply Group, and UN Security Council. There is a likely strategy which could charted by China to fulfill the China's dream and define the global order that recognizes and accepts China as a dominant power. India possibly needs to evolve strategy to live with the adversarial superpower and the neighbor. I'll say stop here, sir.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. I think you set the stage for further discussions based on a vision that you feel that that China has, the fact that China sees India, at least in South Asia, as somebody that is going to resist its regional hegemony. So thank you very much, Gaurav, for your comments. May I now request General Panag.
Thank you, General Huda. Good evening, viewers. I shall be speaking to you about my assessment of the reasons why China undertook this operational maneuver in eastern Ladakh and its possible strategic aims in doing so. As has been highlighted, beginning April, the PLA carried out an operational maneuver in eastern Ladakh and carried out multiple intrusions to reach the area up to its 1959 claim line. The intrusion took place in Depsang, Pangongso North, Konkala, Hot Springs, Gogra, and in the little bit in the Galwan River Valley. By doing so, what China has achieved so far is it has sullied India's international and military reputation. It has prevented the development of border infrastructure, and it has secured key areas that enable it to seize large tracts of territory in event of an escalation. The question that intrigues everyone is, why did China do this? Why did it break 33 years of peace after Sundrangshu incident? And why during the middle of the COVID? So these are the questions that is bothering everybody. Even recently, the foreign minister said that China has given us 5 explanations for the reasons for massing troops on the border. It also implies that the foreign minister did not clarify as to what was the actual reason, thereby implying that even we are not clear as to what the reasons for China having done this operational maneuver. Now, overtly, the confrontations are focused on the 1959 claim line and the areas of differing perceptions. In my view, hardly a reason for breaking peace, which was standing for last 33 years. Now, territory is an emotional issue for any state, and so is it for China. However, strategically, all the territory that China required was secured by it in the mid-50s when it seized most of Aksai Chin and made the Tibet-Xinjiang highway. And whatever was left to secure this highway, it secured in 1962. So it does not require any more territory as far as its strategic interests are concerned. So in my view, the border dispute has been used by China merely as a tool to assert its hegemony over India and embarrass it and undermine its regional and international status. The degree to which it does this depends upon its perception of the military differential that exists between India and China. When it was very pronounced, it went in for war in 1962. When it was limited in 1986-87, the situation got stalemated. And it perceived now that it has adequate military edge to once again embarrass India. But however, why would it choose to embarrass India? What were the immediate triggers that started it all? China considers India to be China wants India to be a cooperative junior partner and not a competitor in the international and regional arena. So long as India continues to play this game, and so long as China perceives that India is not getting too big for its boots, peace will prevail. The moment China starts perceiving, and it will start exerting its hegemony over India through the border dispute. And above all, it is very sensitive to the territory it has usurped in the 50s and in 1962 war. Any attempt that it perceives that it is being threatened or status quo is going to change, the status quo on its own terms, it will again trigger a border dispute. Let me go back to 1962. What were the triggers for 1962? And therein lies lessons for us in 2020. In 1962, India's forward policy in the frontier region was perceived as a threat to the territory and considered a territorial aggression to the territory which China considers as its own, particularly the Tibet-Xinjiang highway. The asylum to Dalai Lama, that means India was perceived to be meddling in Tibet and wanted to restore the Dalai Lama into Tibet and as a competitor for China. India's increasing international status and Prime Minister Nehru's image as a world leader. These were the possible triggers, and these feature in the Politburo discussions which have taken place and which are now available on the internet. So what is the backdrop for the 2020 confrontation? India's alliance with the United States, beginning 2008. If you all note that it is beginning 2008 that China's attitude started changing, and 2010, by the time we started developing our road to DBO sector, it changed further, and it led to the first serious confrontation in 2013 in the Depsang Plains. China also perceives that we are challenging its position in the South China Sea and in the Indo-Pacific region, and are growing relations with Japan, Australia, and Vietnam. We oppose the one belt, one road, the China Park Economic Corridor, in which China has sunk in a lot of money, and it's a prestigious project for it. India's aggressive posture in Doklam. This was also another reason that China felt that India needs to be taught a lesson. Then the changing status of J&K, through which the China Park Economic Corridor passes. While that could have been accepted by China, but rightly so, what our Home Minister said, that Aksai Chin and Gilgit-Baltistan, POK belong to us, and we shall in future definitely seize them once again. So this perception of China sort of is what changed its views, and also the immediate triggers that were India's fast developing fast developing border infrastructure, particularly the road to DBO and the lateral roads going up to the LAC in the DBO sector, particularly in the lower half of the Depsang Plains, where we were on the eastern side of the China's 1959 claim line by a distance of nearly 20 kilometers. In the Galwan Valley, it again felt that our infrastructure is going to threaten the Galwan Valley, and also in parallel, the infrastructure that we were developing from Konkala and from Hot Springs and Gogra area, which could also go into the upper reaches of the Galwan Valley via the Kungrag River, will also threaten the entire Galwan Valley deployment of China. And in the Pangong Tso, again, our development of infrastructure was worrying for China because it forecloses, or rather opens up, the southern option to Aksai Chin. So this is what were the immediate triggers. So if I were to then say that what is China's long-term strategic aim, as far as this particular action in 2020 is concerned, it was to reassert its hegemony over India by embarrassing and undermining India's status as an emerging power regionally and internationally. And it was also to undermine the strong leadership of Prime Minister Modi, who was seen as an international competitor to Xi Jinping. And it also wanted to ensure that the status on the border remains on its own terms. That means no infrastructure development and no threats to be developed to the territory it has already usurped in the 50s and in 62. So China's short-term aim, this was of course is the backdrop, but what is the short-term aim of China? Neutralize the developing threat to Aksai Chin and other territories due to India's developing border infrastructure, permanently secure the areas up to 1959 claim line. 1950 claim line is a cartographic marvel in the sense that it is specifically strategic in nature, that it secures all the areas that can possibly threaten Aksai Chin. So this time it wanted to reach there so that India no longer can ever pose the threat. And having secured this, having achieved strategic surprise, in the event of an escalation, it was prepared for a limited war to capture Depsang Plains, which because of its maneuver and through Galwan as well as in Depsang Plains, that put us at a disadvantage and virtually untenable defensively. Capture area up to Galwan Shok River Junction, all territory north of Pangong Tso. That means right up to Konkala, because once it closes in north of Pangong Tso towards area of Phobrang, then we cannot reach Konkala. And just for the viewers, the distance from the northern bank of Pangong Tso or the northernmost tip of Pangong Tso to Konkala is 100 kilometers. So the intrusion in Pangong Tso ensures that this entire territory in the event of a war can be usurped. It wanted to occupy Kailash Range, probably in event of an escalation, but was preempted by India. And probably in the Indus Valley, it wanted to secure the areas up to Phukche or thereby lean on to the Kailash Range. So what is my conclusion as to what happened with this kind of a strategic aim? Initial gains by China as per its plan. India's massive deployment post 15-16 June, that is after the Galwan incident, massive deployment in the sense that we matched him force on force and probably with a larger force than what China had deployed. Then India has secured the Kailash range, thereby partially neutralized China's advantage, but overall advantage continues to remain with China. Consequently, I'm of the view that India must not compromise, because a stalemate, even with the present situation, is defeat for China. With us sitting on Kailash range, we enjoy a phenomenal advantage. And it, to a great extent, neutralizes the advantage China has. And if we mass our troops in the southern sector, that is Kailash range area and the Indus Valley sector, we can neutralize all gains China makes in event of an escalation. This, in my view, was China's strategic aims. And what is the current strategic situation?
Thank you so much, General Panag. You've outlined possible reasons as to why China did what it did. And you make the point that it's not merely a territorial issue, but a larger issue of undermining, India's regional status, preventing its infrastructure building, etc. So thank you so much, sir, for your remarks. May I now call on Naveen?
Thank you, sir. I would be taking on from where General Panag left regarding the reasons and probably examine whether it is actually India-centric or whether there is a larger reason for China being belligerent throughout his periphery. I would also be speaking a word about collusivity, that is the Pak-China collusivity. As has been brought out earlier, the ascension of China towards global dominance has become more overt with the emergence of Xi Jinping. In words of Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, China today is in the midst of multiple transitions. For the first time in China's history, she is both powerful, yet dependent on the world for commodities, energy, technology, and markets. She's trying to become a maritime power for the first time, and she is entangled in disputes all along her eastern, southern, and southeastern periphery. Her ethnic nationalism, providing the unity of purpose, and authoritarianism, where diversity is discouraged, are both a strength and weakness. Resultantly, China operates from a domain of great confidence and yet may have underlying insecurity. COVID and poor global economic growth has hit China as well, both economically and by promoting ethnic nationalisms around China. Overall, it may be a combination of internal, external, and economic stresses, all manifesting simultaneously, which might explain China's recent transition from assertiveness to aggressiveness. In 2018, Xi Jinping categorically stated, China cannot lose an inch of territory left behind by our predecessors. China under Xi has become aggressive in its territorial quest, both along the continental and maritime borders, highlighted in the disputes in South China Sea, East China Sea, Myanmar, Bhutan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and lately manifesting against India. A point to note here is, in all these areas, the Chinese aggression manifests only in the disputed areas, wherein China aggressively claims territory as per its perception. Against India, leading up to the present standoff, as has been brought out earlier, there had been instances in Depsang in 2013, Shumer in 14, and Doklam in 2017. The LAC remains disputed along the three distinct sectors, that is the western sector, which comprises of eastern Ladakh, middle sector, which is Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, and eastern sector, that is Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. During the series of boundary settlement talks of 2000-2002, the Chinese delegation exchanged maps only of the central sector, but have refused to compare maps of the other two sectors. Consequently, there is a differing perception, as the LAC is neither delineated on maps nor demarcated on ground. As has been brought out earlier, since April 20, PLA transgressed across the line of actual control at Pengongso, Hot Spring, Galwan, and Dipsang Plateau. This was a departure from past routine standoffs, wherein larger quantum of forces came in, larger physical violent confrontations took place, and resulting casualties occurred. The current aggression could be explained as a tactical attempt to straighten and push LAC westwards to dominate and take heights and cut off the Indian forward deployments. In isolation, such considerations would indicate a much more significant role of the PLA in high-level decision-making in China. But these tactical reasons probably may not be able to completely explain the Chinese changing rules of engagement that have been held for so long, as has been brought out earlier as well. There is some link which has been drawn earlier also over the China's resentment over abrogation of 370 and creation of Union Territory of Ladakh with reissued maps having parts of Aksai China. China especially is sensitive to change in status quo regarding Saiching, amongst other reasons of perceived sovereignty with regards to the strategic National Highway G219, which General Panag referred to earlier. This highway has 179 kilometers that passes through Saiching. Further, India's opposition to join RCEP, compounded by long-standing opposition to BRI, India's active participation in the Quad, strengthening diplomatic and military ties with allies, seems to have irked China. Furthermore, Chinese actions are predominantly aimed at claiming its periphery with coercion and intimidation, but without using force, as he's doing all along its periphery. Eastern Ladakh also has a strategic significance, being a sharp wedge between Gilgit-Baltistan in west in POK, which China has positioned its security personnel as part of CPEC, as also Aksai Chin to the east. Also, proximity of DBO to sensitive areas and strategic highways to north of Karakoram Pass adds to this interest. Again, has been brought out earlier. This is validated by the Chinese infrastructure and military buildup, which in the immediate interest aims to dominate the newly constructed strategic all-weather DSDBO, that is Darbuk Shok DBO Road. The factors which relate to poor economic situation, as also internal and external stresses, could also have been a trigger, which have been brought out earlier. So what does China hope to gain from this? Obviously, these occupational actions in Eastern Ladakh thus probably may have a larger strategic imprint apart from tactical advantages. Some of these have been covered, but at the cost of repetition. Re-emphasize credibility of Communist Party of China via hyper-nationalism and divert attention from internal issues, undermine India's credibility in front of neighbors, emerge as an unrivaled Asian superpower, and this is a part of series of reaching out to other Asian nations, militarily alter the status quo in disputed areas with the aim to settle the border dispute from a position of advantage. This may be achieved by creating buffer zones in areas claimed by India to preclude Indian army presence and create opportunities for subsequent occupation by China. In the end, will it escalate? Will it escalate to an armed conflict? Judging by deployments and infrastructure the PLA is putting in place in Tibet and the matching Indian response, it would be a long haul before pre-April status quo is restored, if at all. However, unlike the past confrontations and face-offs, the Chinese actions suggest that for her, issue is probably not just the LAC or its clarification, but is a part of an attempt to exercise control up to its claimed boundaries, which manifests all along its periphery, and also serves the larger political goals. However, the fact remains that China probably did not visualize a strong Indian response. This, combined with the global resentment towards China, mishandling of pandemic, has provided a new mileage to the long-standing China threat. This was evident as per the support extended to India in the recent standoff by US and other countries. China is now entangled in its secondary theater of in a standoff where she has not been able to attain the advantage she aimed for. A major offensive by China is a high-risk gamble, which probably may not bring the benefits that it's want. I'll just say a word about collusivity as well, sir. Sino-Pak collusive threat for India implies a joint threat by both countries working together or in synergy, which could be pre-planned or opportunity and goal-based. The threat could manifest in overt and covert form. China and Pakistan share a long-standing friendship, and the basis for this is the China-Pak Treaty on Friendship, Cooperation, and Good Neighborly Relations of 2005-6. Without going into the details, this treaty forms the basis of their relationship, which has grown stronger over the years. The investment of approximately $50 billion in civil and military infrastructure as part of CPEC, especially in POK, has made China a permanent stakeholder in this area. On 3rd November 2019, Global Times stated, not recognizing the legitimacy of Union Territory of Ladakh, China may reinforce its defenses at borders with India, will firmly safeguard its sovereignty and territories, and enhance communication with Pakistan to jointly oppose India's move that breaks status quo. Of course, China has been in last few decades the largest overt and covert military supplier to Pakistan. There have been active collaboration for development of Pak nuclear capabilities, missiles, Al-Khalid tank, JF-17s, fighter planes, Kate trainers, AWACS, submarines, frigates, etc. China and Pak have actively supported each other in international fora, which has been amply brought out by my fellow officer here. As far as the military collusivity is concerned, the dimensions of this collusivity may fall in the realm of either collusive support without direct military intervention or active military engagement. It could also transition from one form to the other based on opportunities presented. The strands of collusive support without direct military intervention include military hardware supplies, cyber and information warfare, supporting internal conflicts in India. Most of these are already manifesting during peacetime and may increase substantially during a conflict. The deniability factor remains high, which makes such support lucrative. Such kind of support may also manifest in form of posturing of forces by one side to prevent move of surge forces by India against the other side. For instance, if Pak was to move or posture some reserve formations in vicinity of line of control in the current conflict, it may have been difficult for Indian Army to sidestep some of these forces employed presently in eastern Ladakh. As far as the direct military engagements are concerned, historically, we haven't seen full-scale manifestation of two fronts in any of the conflicts with either nation. However, as the strategic interests of both the countries have converged, especially with respect to India, the possibility of full collusivity cannot be ruled out. There could be two scenarios. Pak initiated, China joins. In all the Indo-Pak wars so far, China has never shown any inclination to joining the conflict. And there is little reason to believe that China will launch a full-scale offensive against India in this scenario. However, opportunity-based occupation of territory, especially in the disputed areas along Sino-India border, is highly possible, which will tie up our formations and will also have a possibility to escalate. China initiated, Pak joins. In case of India-China war, the specter of Pak joining the conflict in a limited manner to exploit India's preoccupations along the northern borders cannot be ruled out. Such a manifestation of Pak threat will most likely be along the line of control, which could spread to IB as well. A word about the two-front war. Since India's border disputes with both China and Pakistan continue to fester, as also the strengthening of Pak-China relationship, India rightly perceives that any conflagration with one country may lead to other to exercise military option against India, either to support the other or to gain advantage. Hence, a two-front war, though a worst-case scenario, remains a real possibility. The mutual convergence of Sino-Pak interests has increased, and military coordination has now become a larger part of the overall strategy. Hence, such collusivity is most likely to manifest in Ladakh, either in the mutual interest of BRI or with Pak interests in Siachen and Kargil converging with the Chinese interests to secure its perceived vulnerabilities along DBU. There is an argument that there is remote possibility that three nuclear countries will engage in conventional war. Such presumptions may carry great risk of undermining conventional military arm of the national security, as recent limited conflicts both against China and Pakistan have shown that the threat of conventional war is very rare, especially along the disputed borders. Another argument propagates that Chinese asymmetry in technology will preclude their boots on ground in case of limited direct action collusivity. I would like to draw attention to the current standoff, where despite such technological asymmetry of China, Indian Army was able to rattle the Chinese by physically occupying certain strategic heights at Kailash ranges. So is there a possibility of direct action collusivity in the current standoff? So far, India has done very well to deny intended gains to China, thereby negating possibility of Pakistani collusivity in the near future. However, if the current standoff does not result in restoration of status quo ante and provides tactical and operational advantages to PLA, it will leave a window for further exploitation by either China or Pak or both in the coming years. Since the manifestation of collusivity will be based on perception, neither China or Pak should be able to perceive that India will militarily allow these nations to unfold their strategies. In the current standoff, China, having convinced the face-off, which it thought it could win without fighting, finds a hardball Indian response and is in a situation it probably didn't think through. For India, Developing new capabilities, as also rebalancing the existing forces and capabilities, is required to be carried out at national level to formulate a robust mechanism to such a threat. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Naveen. Your first part when you talked about the reasons for why the Chinese have undertaken sort of also echoed the points that General Panag was making, that let's not look at it merely at a tactical sort of viewpoint. And then you made some interesting points about collusivity and how it could play out, based on different scenarios, Pak-led, China-led. And we will discuss some more of these once the opening remarks are made. So may I now call on AVM Bahadur to present his point of view.
Thank you, General Huda, and thank you for the organizers for getting me in here. I'll go a step down because most of the reasoning has already been covered by the previous speakers. Deadlock in the negotiations. Is there anything to do with air power symmetry? This is what I would be talking about, because the Chinese have 4-5 concepts, possibly gradations in which they operate. We all know about their active defense policy. Second is their forward positioning. Third is making a noise, saber rattling, just the name given to this panel discussion, saber rattling in eastern Ladakh. Then preemptive strikes, in-depth strikes, and possibly victory through elite troops. These are views of General Narasimhan, who is a known China expert, and he just spoke to us in the recent past. So I come back to the deadlock. Is it genuine or is it to gain time? With time, both sides have strengthened the defenses. It's but natural that this will happen. But is there more to it? And I, as an air power user, having been a user and talking about it and reading about it, feel there is something to do with this asymmetry which exists at present. So obviously the Chinese have misread what would be India's reaction. Frankly, any psychological assessment of Indian leadership would have told them that things are different. Why they faltered? Well, I'm sure they are doing some research in their side. So the deadlock which has happened and why they came in Depsang, for example, having flown in that area very extensively, almost 1/5 of my life has been spent in flying in that area. Coming close to the DBO Murgo Road, that section, the Depsang thing, that side. Prevent further development of DBO, for example, because of the road that is coming up, and maybe we had plans to develop DBO further. Now that may be a problem, a hindrance, because of where they are sitting right now. Are they waiting to further their aim? That is something that we really have to think about. And while we can keep guessing or analyzing, I feel that stonewalling that is happening is to gain time, in which China is trying to neutralize the advantage that the Indian air power has at present, and the IF will be key to blunt their advance through battlefield airstrikes, or what we call the close air support, and battlefield air interdiction. Air interdiction close to the battlefield where supplies are coming in towards their forward troops. So the advantage that IF has, or rather the disadvantage which they have possibly at present, and I keep using the word at present, is a lower or possibly an inferior training status of their aircrew, gaps in their airfield locations. The distances between their airfields in the Tibetan region is to the order of 500 to 600 kilometers, and somewhere in the central sector is actually something like 1,000 kilometers. They are not mutually supportive. And I am going to come to why I'm talking about this. They are far spaced out, not supportive, while Indians are, right from Leh, Srinagar, Bareilly, Sarsawa, Bareilly, Hindon, and you carry on to the northeast, Bagdogra, Dibrugarh, Chabua, everywhere. We have got our airfields spaced out, well spaced out and in planes. Now, for them to improve their training status and gaps in their airfields, they will require a certain amount of time, a finite time. Improvements in training status, roughly 4 to 5 years. Improvement in making their airfields, they really are fast at infrastructure development, anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years, roughly. It's the third reason, that is their Achilles heel at present. And that is the gaps in their air defense coverage in the complete pivotal area. And this is what they have gone on a war footing to try and plug this through new installations, through new SAM positioning, surface to air missile positioning, new radars. They are making that now all these are movable, but certain permanent establishments are required. There are satellite photos that are all over in social media now. They are there on Twitter, which show the amount of activity that is happening in constructing them. So blunting the IAF advantage of good training and better aircraft and payload capability, because all our airfields are at low altitude, and better training by strengthening their air defense network. Because the IAF plans would be to strike, and they would lead in case we go into a hot war. These should be up, that radar coverage should be up in a year's time. It's then that we can expect saber rattling to start again. This is what I was saying. Now, is there a historical example to support what I have just put out? If we think back to the Egyptian-Israeli scenario, in the 1967 war, the Egyptian Air Force was totally wiped out because of the preemptive strike by the Israelis. What did they do? They, with the help of the Soviets, built up a very dense air defense coverage. And during the Yom Kippur War, just 7 years down the line, in 73, the Israeli Air Force almost came to its knees. But as the Egyptian army crossed the Suez Canal and went out of its air defense coverage, it got clobbered by the Israelis again. The Chinese think far ahead. This was the wrong time for them to have gone in for an offensive or continued with the Indian Air Force being at the status that what it is. So what would the IAF do? Well, we have the munitions, we have the aircraft, and we have the exact locations of these sites. They will be targets of choice, targets so that our strike packages go through. Can we preempt and surprise them? Well, air power would be most effective against them, but that's a political call. And we don't go to war, or a nation doesn't go to war that easily. In the interim, what we need to do is to keep gathering data of location and capability of the air defense targets, because 6 to 7 months from now, they would have built up the air defense coverage. The saber rattling, which has sort of stopped now, if you notice, the Chinese media is, the propaganda has stopped, may start again. We need to think ahead. While we think of years and decades ahead, let's think at least of the next year or 2 years. I'll take your questions in the question hour. Back to you, General Huda.
Thank you so much, AVM Bahadur. Very interesting perspective that what the Chinese are doing now, and the reason why they're continuing with this deadlock is because obviously, and it's visible, that they're building up their air defense capability, particularly in Tibet. And your sense is that come summer, you could well see greater sort of activity on the Chinese side. So thank you very much, sir, for your comments. May I now call on General Raj Shukla?
Session Chair, General Huda, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. A very good evening. A great pleasure to be joining this online event. Thank you for the opportunity and the invite. Well, recent events in Ladakh have once again brought to the fore, center stage, the challenging and, shall I say, the very daunting prospect of a risen China. China is already the number 2 economy in the world. 10 years from now, it will be number 1. A China whose strategic, military, and even larger comprehensive addressal will need a reimagination of sorts in our strategic outlook and in our national security mind space, if we are to deal with the challenge with necessary purpose, precision, and certitude. This is well nigh possible, but is also a huge ask. Business as usual will not do. We will need to think through the challenge. We will need to act long and deep. That is the thread I propose to develop over the next 10 minutes. That is also, in my view, the central lesson from Galwan. Let me begin with a bit of history, because there are very useful lessons for statecraft in the careful study of historical narratives. From the year 1 to the year 1820 or so, may I recall for you, India and China were the world's 2 foremost economies. They were also the world's most consequential powers. The 2 nations have a long history of contact and great connect, but there has also been considerable antagonism, strategic jostling, contest, and confrontation. As Iqbal Chand Malhotra tells us in his recent book, in the early 15th century, Emperor Yongle and Admiral Zhang He designed several naval expeditions to the Indian Ocean, specifically Calicut and Cochin, with a view to establish Chinese presence, impose imperial control over IOR trade, and extend the Yongle Empire's tributary system to India. A little later, in August-September 1420, a naval armada commanded by Hu Xian threatened the king of Jaunpur to dissuade him from moving against the Sultan of Bengal. So you have the Chinese using military coercion to influence heartland politics in India. In the First Opium War, July 1840, in the town of Dinghai on Juzan Island, an Indian Army battalion group defeated the troops of the Chinese Qing Empire. And there are many more examples. But the point is this, that if these are indeed the characterizations of the broad sweep of Sino-Indian relations in the period that I referred to, with pronounced strains of influence operations, competition, coercion, contestation, and even conflict, what about the other narrative that we have grown up on? That for centuries India and China have lived in peace, hence 1962 was merely an aberration. Clearly, one of the two is a historical misreading, or worse, a distortion. The danger of historical misreadings, distorted narratives, therefore, is the first failure in our strategic military addressal of China that we must be wary of. For if the fundamental premises are not robust, if they are flawed, concomitant errors in strategic policy are bound to follow. So if the belief is that 1962 was merely an aberration in centuries of peace, then the instrument of force will get pushed somewhat to the periphery of our strategic worldview in terms of nursing, leveraging as an agency in diplomacy and as a tool for securing equilibrium and equipoise. This is particularly unhelpful when you are countering or contending with a system wherein the instrument of force is rather central to the strategic project, with Zhou Enlai once describing the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs as the cultural ambassadors of the PLA. So far greater osmosis between defense and diplomacy in the Indian context is imperative. In a somewhat similar way, in the manner in which you read the tea leaves of the evolving nature of conflict or the great flux in the changing character of war, also have profound implications on your strategizing and operational prowess. So over the last few decades, we saw these monumental changes in the character of war, space and precision challenging the fundamental tenets of fire and maneuver in combat, the changing equations in the text, the squadron company battles, the physical fight, and the context, emerging domains, the impact of technology of combat, the dramatic new strains in the combined arms balance, loiter munitions and lethal autonomous weapon systems displacing the traditional prima donnas, the tanks and the artillery, etc., etc. Now the staggering pace of change in depth and width, in complexity and nuance, did merit nimble responses. But strangely, some quarters of the strategic commentariat came to the puzzling conclusion that the probability of conflict was receding. In fact, the reality was quite the opposite. Military burdens were only growing, demanding newer proficiencies in kinetic combat, in emerging domains, in precisionary, intelligentization, military IoTs, algorithmic warfare, multi-domain operations, even as legacy challenges like cross-border terrorism remained. The case that I make is this. that we revisit the larger narratives, those of history, the profound changes in the character of war, the economy-defense interface, the disruptions in technology, to come up with smarter solutions to meet the thrust and parry of our long-term security competition with China, much in the manner that Andrew Marshall did to help US navigate its challenge with the Soviet Union in the Cold War. That is critical. Our tactical responses have always been fairly good. Nathula, Sumandrong Chu, now Ladakh. We, however, need to buttress and energize them in a larger strategic military frame. May I now move to another metric in the strategic military addressal of China, which is our understanding of China's huge strategic makeover itself, especially in the Sino-Indian context. For the first time in history, perhaps, we have two powers, the world's number 1 and 3 economies in PPP terms, China and India respectively, growing in close proximity in the absence of historical buffers. There's no Tibet. There has been considerable penetration of the Himalayas thanks to communications and technology. Their geostrategic spaces, in my view, will inevitably intersect due to the unsettled nature of our borders, due to the salience of unification of territories in the Chinese worldview, the inexorable logic of balance of power politics allowing for only one regional hegemon, and the need to diminish the closest peer competitor at all costs. So India's rise will not go uncontested. The interaction could well be peaceful and productive, but the time for negotiating such a modus vivendi is now, when China is still number 2. In the next 10 years or so, when China becomes number 1, negotiation will become even more difficult. China's comprehensive strategic makeover has many shades and layers. Just a few facts that we may like to take note of. It is time we realize that we have a superpower on our northern borders, one whose economic zoom and military gallop have indeed been spectacular in ambition, pace, and scale. China's military modernization, we may like to note, has been equally deep and perspicacious. There's been a complete overhaul of the PME system in the PLA with a view to emulate the best global models and practices. President Xi declared 2014 as the year of the PME in China and visited most PLA academies, the infantry school, the artillery school, the aviation academy. He has nursed the growth of the PLA in a very intimate and personal manner. China's signature projects, the Rocket Force, and particularly the Strategic Support Force, signify its resolve to transit from industrial era warfighting to digital era sophistication and capacities. The PLA is working diligently to configure a military IoT which in a few years from now will enable the autonomous operation of weapon platforms and machines without human intervention, catapulting the PLA into a different technological league altogether. Civil-military fusion. In China, the civil and military domains have fused completely to complement each other's growth. There are simply no silos. The PLA led Huawei's push towards 5G, for example. Today, you have PLA teams embedded in mega AI projects in major cities. Facial recognition, autonomous cars, the experiences as they are gained naturally translate into military applications along the borders. The PLA has launched a global hunt, made huge investments to get the best of talent. The Chinese Academy of Military Engineering and Physics recruited 47 overseas scientists in 2019, to include scientists from the US Los Alamos National Laboratory to give a fillip to military projects. In 2004 or so, they pick up a bright young Chinese scientist, Professor Jian V. Pan, send him to the Heidelberg University in Austria with the best mind in quantum, Anton Zeliger, and he comes back to make the quantum radar or the quantum satellite, and now he's working on the quantum radar. With China, we are faced also with the real prospect of a possible strategic squeeze. The PLA Navy is already a maritime neighbor in the IOR, with a potent eastern maritime flank. Is also a developing western maritime flank, Gwadar and Djibouti. We shall see a substantive Chinese presence in the IOR in the years to come. India could well be faced with a geostrategic squeeze from the LAC and the IOR concurrently. We need to brace up and act now. In conclusion, let me say this. The successful asymmetric deterrence of China is very much a doable proposition if we could address some of the issues that I have raised. The embrace of 3 additional metrics may also be useful. We need to develop a stronger and cold-blooded strategic response embellished in far greater discipline. It is not that we are not acting. There is a lot of work being done on professional military education. Presently, we are looking at overhauling our entire syllabus from the NDA to the NDC. The CNCs of the 3 training commands are doing this. We're doing a lot of work on disruptive technologies, better talent management through more productive use of the study leave system. There is massive outreach to academia and startups. The CDS DMA, in my view, is a game changer. The MEA has set up what is called NEST, a division on new and emerging strategic technologies. We see a far greater connect in our foreign and defense policies. We do need, however, to enhance the rapidity and scale of our responses exponentially. We need to step up our game by an order of magnitude. In our long-term strategizing, we will also need to answer some critical questions. Will strategic autonomy, for example, suffice to balance China, or do we need to build greater heft into various partnerships, countervailing coalitions? What should be the right balance between maritimity and continentality in our force structuring? We also need to usher, like China, unfettered military-civil fusion to enable cross-pollination of the best talents by moving beyond government spaces in the traditional areas of recruitment to create agile bureaucracies and a defense ecosystem of innovation and enterprise. Agile bureaucracies are essential for speedy capacity building. I'll just give you an example why this challenge is so acute. Graham Allison tells us that today, if the USA builds a bridge in 4 years, China builds the same bridge in 49 days. So that is shall I say, the scale of the challenge. So capacity building can only happen if we have far greater agile bureaucracies. And lastly, the overarching frame of our response will have to be greater strategic cunning. China is a crafty competitor. Just let me give you an example. There is a gentleman called Zhang Weiwei. He was the advisor to Deng Xiaoping. He has written a monograph called The 3 Genetic Flaws of Democracies. And the third point in that flaw is the obsession of the Western democracies with process and procedure. And the next paragraph, he goes on to suggest that strangle them in their own systems. Convert democratic obsessions to strategic advantage. China funds programs to tell the West how to increase their hatching periods, add more process to our various procedures and processes. So it is a crafty competitor. We too need to embrace our very own Kautilyan concepts of wit, cunning, deceit, and guile. A return to the inherent wisdom of our strategic writing, Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed, for example. National interest by means fair or foul may be a good place to begin with. If we do so thoughtfully and meaningfully, we will heighten the prospects for peace and lower the incentives for war. That, after all, is the acme of sound statecraft. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan Shukla. You raised, I think, very important issues that as we look at our future capability development, that we will need to go into in much greater detail. You've also sort of outlined the geopolitical scenario and the fact that China is going to remain a challenge for India. And the challenge will only grow because the capability differential between the two countries, both militarily and economically, could even increase. So these are going to be challenging times as to how we negotiate over the next few years. May I now call on the last speaker, Mr. Ram Madhav, to please give us opening.
Thank you, General Huda. My namaskars to all the fellow panelists and all those who are listening in. This session is taking place in the backdrop of the standoff on the Western sector. Naturally, most of the discussion is influenced by the immediate happenings in that region. While those developments, analyzing them and analyzing India's response is very important, I'm afraid that whatever happens in the coming months or years in that sector is not going to conclusively solve the problem between our two countries. It is said that you cannot choose your parents. It is equally true that you cannot choose your neighbors. You have to learn to live with them. So what is of utmost importance to us is that at one level to respond to the immediate challenges, immediate situations like the one that we face today. We have faced it in the past many times. Probably we have to face similar situations in the future as well. But at the same time, to look at, not lose sight of India's long-term strategic objectives. And in that scheme of things, how do you handle countries like China? Firstly, about the immediate situation. I think we, as a military and as a government, have responded to the immediate challenge in an appropriate manner. Number one, we have stood our ground firmly, engaged proactively at the diplomatic level. So this new mantra of proactive diplomacy, together with strong ground posturing, is definitely a good thing, and it will definitely yield us good results. We have done it at the time of Doklam also, and we are doing the same thing again now. Many countries, especially those who are across the 9-dash lane, if you look at them or if you talk to them, they will tell you that they are not able to stand up in the manner in which India has stood up today on the ground as well. So this is an important thing that we have done right. The second thing we have done right is to limit it, keep it as a bilateral dispute. I think it's a very important thing. Many countries in the world are interested to, jump in, sell you weapons, no harm in buying weapons, but also take it much further to hope and expect that India will probably join this group or that group, a new alliance, anti-China alliance. India will become an integral part of it. At least as far as the immediate challenge is concerned, we have not allowed that thing to come in. We have not allowed ourselves to be drifted towards any alliance or into any country camp. Having said it, how do we look at the other scenario? While the immediate challenge, as many of you experts have analyzed, you have given solutions to it, you have given very important suggestions, and I really appreciate, of course, all the presentations, but especially Lieutenant General Raj Shukla's final presentation. We need to now also think beyond this immediate challenge while addressing this immediate challenge in an appropriate manner. Now, right from the time of independence, we have set certain benchmarks for our foreign policy, our diplomacy. One of them was that we always believed that our immediate region of Asia, the Asian region, is an important playground for us. We want to play an important role here. Secondly, we always held that we have certain global ambitions. We want to play a bigger role, not just like one country, but a bigger role in the world. And number three, we decided that we will remain unaligned. We won't join this camp or that camp. We will play a proactive role, but remain an independent with enough autonomy, strategic and otherwise, the autonomy will be maintained. Without losing sight of these things, we have to look at the future in store for us and then look at where the China question will be placed. Now, in this scheme of things, China definitely is a big challenge for us today. And various reasons have been already enumerated by previous panelists. I see two important challenges, or rather three important challenges coming from China. Number one is its economy. As, of course, General Raj Shukla very correctly pointed out, a very strong economy. And together with it, a very strong technology. What is staring at us in the name of China today? So the economic heft of that country is definitely going to put a big pressure on us in this region. Second is the issue of Chinese leadership. Now, again, China as a society is a Confucian society, but a leadership is Sun Tzuian leadership. A Confucian society with a Sun Tzuian leadership. You need to deal with that leadership. And it is not the time when Deng Xiaoping thought that we will rise as a peaceful nation. The rise will be peaceful. Right now, the rise of China is no longer peaceful. So you are staring at a scenario where your interest lies in the immediate Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific region. There the stakes are there, but there the challenge is in the form of this northern neighbor China, in terms of its economy and in terms of its leadership. Now, looking at that challenge, tackling that challenge requires not just India's own singular efforts, but a global cooperation. While on the borders, we need to maintain bilateralism to our east. When we try to achieve larger geostrategic objectives and goals and all, we need to build a strong coalition, strong partnership with many other like-minded countries. Number one, to ensure that the rise of China will be peaceful. Number two, to ensure that the region remains inclusive and peaceful. It's not just enough to think about peace alone. It needs to be on the principle of inclusivity, because that's what right from Nehru's time we stood for. I think going forward, we need to look at the India's strategic imperatives on these issues, on these challenges, and certainly, if we discuss further, we will get many important answers to these questions. I think I will stop there. Thank you and namaskar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramadar, for your very incisive comments. And I think you've taken a much longer picture that goes beyond the current situation in Ladakh and how we need to look at our regional policies and our bilateral issues to deal with China. So, Mr. Ramadar, let me just start this now discussion with you only. You mentioned that there is a need, at least on some issues, to keep issues between India and China at the bilateral level. RCEP, would that sort of go against what we are looking at? And finally, with the growing power disparity, do you think, Mr. Ramadar, that we can continue to handle issues bilaterally, or will need to rely on partners to make sure that China's rise, as you mentioned, is peaceful?
On the border issue, I think the time-tested policy of bilateralism, whether it is in the context of China or in the context of Pakistan, or for that matter, God forbid, if you have any issues with any other neighbor going forward. Hopefully, we won't have any such issues, although right now we have an issue with even Nepal. But on all these issues, we have always maintained that we will handle them on a bilateral basis. We are competent enough, because after all, our neighborhood relations have seen ups and downs in the last 7 decades. So we have learned to handle those issues. There is power asymmetry, nobody denies that. But even in the face of power asymmetry, we are confident enough to handle them bilaterally. I strongly feel that bilateralism principle should not be given up as far as the border issues are concerned. But on the larger issue of the future trajectory for India, India's security challenges lie to the west of its geography. India's economic opportunity lies to the east of its geography. We have to make a very important distinction between these two challenges. You have security challenges from Pakistan, you have security issues in Afghanistan, the new growing arc from Pakistan to Turkey. This is a security challenge. We have to look at it differently. But to the east, in the Indo-Pacific, a huge economic opportunity is awaiting us to seize. Now, there you mentioned about Quad. Quad is thus far only an economic alliance. It's not so far declared itself as a military or strategic alliance. In fact, you know very well, all of you know very well, that the latest Quad meeting, the 4 foreign ministers have not even issued a joint statement. Each country issued its statement separately. And in India's statement, one word that was significantly different from the statements of other countries was, India would like to see this region in very inclusive prism. So we have an approach to this region. Ideally, India should encourage this region to be managed on the principle of regionalism. Now, regionalism will not be appreciated by many big countries in the world. Especially countries like America would certainly want to play a role. Countries in Europe would certainly want to play a role. I'm not denying their role in this region, because every country today has stakes in Indo-Pacific, which is the most happening region. But regionalism should be the principle, because in this region, if the regional powers like Australia, India, Japan, Singapore, ASEAN group of countries, if we come together, then as I mentioned, even ensuring that China's rise will be peaceful will become more feasible. On that principle, we should go forward. On RCEP, I do appreciate the point that you are making. Personally speaking, India should keep its options open. This is what the foreign minister said at the Shangri-La dialogue earlier January this year, if you all recall. We should keep our options open. Because, as I said, economic opportunity lies in that region. But I think the thinking of the government seems to be slightly different.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ramadhan, for those very frank and open remarks. I now want to come to General Panag. So, you mentioned that there's really no territorial sort of large territorial intent behind what China did, and it's related to regional status, attempt to embarrass India, statements that were passed on J&K by the Home Minister, etc. What should be our response? Our response largely, do you see it as being territorial? Or do you see a more comprehensive response that has taken place? Is that response fine, or do you think that we need to step up and do something else?
See, General Huda, as I mentioned, that China's strategic aim was to undermine our international and regional status and embarrass us. And also embarrass, the strong leadership of Prime Minister Modi, who has become a world leader in his own right. Though this is their strategic aim. The immediate trigger was our developing infrastructure, which China was perceiving as a threat, coupled with the statements of the Home Minister and other ministers and the public at large, that we want Aksai Chin back and we want POK, Baltistan back. So this and our infrastructure, which was very fast development in the last 7 years under the NDA regime, 2 and 3, very fast development. This is what China perceived as being threatened. Now, what should be our response? How do we neutralize this aim of China both ways? Firstly, as far as China's strategic aim is concerned, we must not compromise on the border issue, and we must continue to stalemate China. Currently, there's a stalemate in vogue. China doesn't want a full-scale war, and neither do we want a full-scale war. But our positions on Kailash Range are fairly neutralizing China's advantage elsewhere. So I do not think an escalation will take place. And if China is stalemated, in fact, I would say the whole world is watching us. Not only the region, our allies, everybody is watching us as to how do we respond. If we cave in and have any kind of an agreement on Chinese terms, then China has achieved its strategic aim of undermining our international and regional status and embarrassing us. If we stay put, even with the present perceived loss of territory in terms of intrusions and all, but with poised in southern part of eastern Ladakh, that is Chishul and the Indus Valley, and on the Kailash range, and this stalemate continues. After all, the stalemate after Sundrangchu, where we confronted them, continued for a long time. The confrontation lasted physically 1 year, and the final settlement only came years later. So if we stalemate China, then it's victory for us. So our aim should be to stalemate China and not go in for tactical solutions in terms of immediate disengagement or de-escalation. Yes, we can work on disengagement, de-escalation, provided both sides are equal footing. Equal footing. And this should include the entire region from Depsang right up to Doklam and Chor. Otherwise, a stalemate is victory for us and a defeat for China.
Thank you, sir. Let me now turn to AVM Bahadur. Two issues, sir, if you could respond to. One is, we hear a lot from the army about collusive threat and how the army looks at it. So if you could just sort of briefly tell us, how is it that the Air Force is looking at the collusive threat, and what are your sort of perceptions about it? My second question is, you see, as we look at China ahead in the future, we are going to be relying a lot on US military capability, not directly, but in terms of arms transfer, in terms of technology. The US has alignment of sort of interests with India as far as China is concerned. One sticking point for the Americans is the S-400 deal, and there's talk about sanctions, etc., being sort of imposed. Do you see the S-400 deal as being something that puts some kind of restrictions on our ability to get technology from the US, or do you think we'll be able to work around it? So these two aspects, very briefly, if you could comment on those.
Yeah, I would. If I just 2 lines on the previous one regarding the larger geopolitical thing. I mean, I find it quite surprising that a nation would risk its reputation and standing for a few 100 square kilometers. There is something much bigger that is, I feel, coming up. Whether it is in terms of getting us entangled in an economic backlash, that is, we are pumping so much money, so much equipment to upset our economic balance, our budgeting, etc. Because that was one way the Americans brought the Soviets down to their knees. It took them 20 years or more. But could that be one of the aims? That is, maybe we can discuss it at a different nation. But I feel there is something much more. Okay, S-400. Down the past decades, the Indian political leadership, whoever has been in power, has been critically examining our needs. And we have had the advantage of not being aligned with any bloc as such. We were flexible. We were flexible earlier. We are flexible even now. And as Mr. Ram Madhav said, we are trying to keep it as a bilateral issue. So S-400 coming in, yes, there are a lot of press reports that the Americans have now put a sanction on Turkey because of the cuts. How we handle it, it's in our interests. If the Americans profess their friendship with us as being two distinct partners because of being democracies, etc., they have to understand that every nation has its own priorities and own threats. And every nation, especially India, a proud nation like India, will deal with its threats in its own way. Yes, in consonance with its other aims in mind, diplomatic aims. So I personally feel the S-400, which is coming, the contract is signed, it will come. And that's where diplomacy will come in. And I do not think the Americans would have an issue because they have to weigh the importance of India in South Asia vis-a-vis China also and other countries. The other one about the collusivity with Pakistan and how does the air power or the Air Force thinks about it. We are well placed. We talked about numbers. I also saw the program, the session in the morning where the previous air chief was there. We are well placed with respect to the armament that we have, that we can have more and that we should have more, certainly, especially the squadron numbers. That is required to be brought in. And I'm sure the political leadership is aware of that and is dealing with this. Would we be able to handle two fronts at the same time? Now, that's a situation where it has to be seen from the political angle of whether two nations, both nuclear armed and India being nuclear armed, as one of the previous speakers brought out, getting into a conflict of that magnitude where it becomes a full-scale war between three nations or two versus one is something that has to be weighed on very many parameters. So if the question is the Air Force or the Indian Air Power ready in a way to handle some variation of this 1 plus something or 1.5 or something like that? Yes, I do feel it is there. We talk about, if I can just take a minute more, presently we have a time frame of roughly 5 to 8 years. We are better off in terms of flight refuelers. Our Apaches are flying there in Leh and in that area. The Chinese do not have any attack helicopters that can operate at those altitudes. They don't have. Let's be very clear. Our AWACS presently are better. Remember, the Chinese basic threat is in their eastern front. So they can't put everything up against us. So we are better. Incidentally, our airlift capability presently, till the time their Y-20 aircraft comes up, is much better with our C-17s, 11 C-17s that we have got, plus the 10 odd IL-76. So we are well placed as an air power to handle this, and I don't think the viewers or anybody else should have any doubt about it.
Thank you very much, AVM. Raj, let me turn to General Raj Shukla. Raj, you have talked a lot about how the Chinese military capability is growing. And the fears are that as we go into the future, the military capability gap between India and China is only set to grow. So I remember reading an estimate by an EU report on budgets of 2030, military budgets of 2030. And it said while India could reach approximately $200 billion in the next 10 years, the Chinese defense budget could go as much as up to $700 billion. That's a huge sort of differential. You also pointed out how they're advancing in technology, the areas of civil military fusion, in which they're extremely, extremely successful. When we look at our own capability development, are there some worries? One, and so let me just point out to two areas. One is our own sort of R&D efforts, our own technology development, and I know there is a lot of talk about Atmanirbhar, but it doesn't, seem to be meeting as much success as we want it to succeed. So, are we going to be able to actually adopt these kind of technologies as we go ahead? We have a PSU network. Our civil military fusion efforts are not great, and no country is going to give you very high-end technology. And the second is, let's also be realistic about budgets and the defense budget that is there. And I don't see the government being able to substantially grant you additional funds. And so therefore, when you're looking at military capability development, how are you, you're an army commander, how is the army sort of looking at this? And how are you going to be able to manage, your whole issues about revenue versus capital budget?
So both the questions, I think, are extremely pertinent, and they are central to the manner in which we handle China. Let me first come to defense allocations. The central challenge is this, that how do you create smart, nimble, agile militaries within finite budgets? Now, that is the whole problem. The Chinese have done a good job of asymmetric deterrence vis-a-vis USA. So the point I make is that I'll also make this case for enhancing budgets, but I'll just come to it. Within budgets, existing budgets, a lot can be done to go smart, nimble, agile by structural changes, jointness, CDS, DMA, all this. But the point that I wish to make here is that we have a long road to travel. I mean, every step that you take is just a precursor to the next level that you would need to evolve. I'll give an example. The CDS, DMA in our case is a great game changer, but it is good enough merely for industrial era jointness. For digital era sophistication to which the Chinese are graduating to, you need to get to another level. So all this is independent of budgets. Structural corrections, jointness, PME, these kind of things are independent of budgets. Also, when I talk about these narratives, I wish to make a point about enhanced defense allocations, just by way of consideration. Of late, the common wisdom seems to be that accumulation of power, or in accumulation of power, the economics is the only game in town. I would just like to give you 2-3 examples why this may not be the case. After the Depression, President Roosevelt used the military-industrial empire not only to bail the Americans out of the Depression, but also to substantially, shall I say, strengthen the American armed forces. China, through its very acclaimed economic zoom, has used many phases, has used defense to pump prime the economy. Adam Smith spoke of defense being more important than affluence. The point that I make is that there is a case for larger defense allocations if we revisit these narratives. Economy, defense can be interfaced in a better manner. So that is the 2 points I would like to make about your first question about defense allocations. The third point that you make about technologies, sir, I can speak for the army. We were laggards at one point of time, but in the last 3, 4, 5 years, a lot has been done. We are looking at these entire bouquet of technologies, from artificial intelligence to drone swarming, counter drones, blockchain, quantum, algorithmic warfare. Recently, a very comprehensive study was done, and in each of these areas, we have identified projects. Funding has been allocated, and we are making a start. So a lot has been done over the last 2 to 3 years. We are certainly looking beyond DRDOs and PSUs, and for this, the current government has launched a huge drive, and results are beginning to come in. So we have reached out greatly to academia, to R&D outside the traditional areas, to startups, so on and so forth. I'll just give you an example. A Delhi-based startup has been funded for a low-light imaging sensor, which has the potential to change image intensification capacities to transform them. We are looking at high-space UAVs. We are looking at ramjet technologies to extend ranges of existing artillery inventories. And all this is with a particular agency or with a particular vendor or with a particular startup with funding. So we have done a lot of work over the last 2 to 3 years, but as I never fail to remind all those who are listening, that with China, the gap is large. So we have to step up the game even more. So this is the point I made about economics and R&D. We are looking beyond traditional sectors. And even within the traditional sectors, a lot of steps have been taken to smarten them, to make them more accountable for delivery and so on and so forth. So these are the 2 responses I have, sir, to your questions.
Raj, one short follow-up question. At least in the army, there's a lot of debate on boots on ground versus technology, the limits of technology, that we need boots on ground in areas like the line of control and the LAC. Are you going to be able to manage this boots on ground, higher technology, or is there some real serious sort of debate on how we need to reduce our manpower costs in order to achieve greater modernization? Very briefly, if you can.
So once again, it's a difficult question to answer because there are no ready-made solutions. It's not that if you get technology, you can just downsize in one go. But there is smart optimization. And I mean, you were the Army commander in the Northern Command when I served under you. And you did demonstrate that technology is of great use along the line of actual control. The LC. It is of great use in what we did by way of counter-infiltration and so on and so forth. So technology complements manpower in a big way. It is also a reality that we do need to get our manpower costs. But the central challenge is this. It's easier to speak about it in seminar discussions and all, but what do you do when you have unsettled borders and the kind of deployments that you have? So it is a difficult choice. We have to make some steps. And here also I would like to tell you that some steps have been taken. We have been taking a look at our manpower. And at areas where we were bloated, steps are being taken to reduce the manpower. The other issue that has now cropped up, so over the last 2-3, shall I say, months or years, Idlib and Armenia, Azerbaijan, they also seem to suggest that do we need the same brick and mortar capacities, or within the brick and mortar capacities, do we need newer stuff? For example, an armored regiment which has 45 tanks, can it make do with 30 tanks and drones worth the cost of those 15 tanks? Even in an artillery regiment, do you need all the guns, or do you need what the Turks did brilliantly, these artillery drone complexes? So it is not only a matter of manpower versus equipment, but within equipment, do we invest in those legacy brick and mortar systems, or are there smarter ways to have a more, more productive inventory? So all these questions are being looked at, and we are acting on them, but there are no easy solutions.
Thanks, Jan Shukla. Let me now come to the two brigadiers who've been very patiently sort of waiting all this while. Naveen, let me come to you first. You've also been the defense attaché in in Myanmar. Is there some concern, and after all, the LAC and the undefined LAC is not only limited to Eastern Ladakh, but also to the Eastern sector in Sikkim and in Arunachal Pradesh. Is there some concern that, and as Evin Bahadur also said, if they start stepping up their activities in summers after having, sort of a built-up capability in Tibet, that there would be some concern about the Eastern sector? And secondly, about whether there is any fear that China could sort of incite or activate insurgency in the Northeast? Yeah, Naveen.
Sir, as far as this point about build-up towards the eastern sector is concerned, it does remain a possibility. However, as I highlighted earlier, sir, that maybe there is a larger design where they want to express themselves all across in the areas of dispute. And as part of that, as you've seen, sir, though they backed off from Doklam earlier, there's been a fresh build-up of Doklam. So they would come. They would contest areas of dispute, and there is no reason to not believe that these will not be manifesting in future as well. So I think we say modernization, but is modernization at the cost of force optimization? Do we need to develop new technologies in terms, and you're well aware, sir, that what are our surveillance capabilities? Now, to react to certain situations when we have limited reserves, we do need certain amount of surveillance and then certain amount of movement capabilities with limited reserves. So that's the first part. So there would definitely be a build-up. There would definitely be a reaction. If not now, maybe later. If they have to back off now in Ladakh, we have to have surveillance and structures in place because they would definitely come. The Chinese philosophy of loss of face would definitely make them to react unless we show them strength in the areas where there is dispute. That's the first part, sir. As far as the fanning of insurgency in Northeast, sir, as the time I was there in 2016 to 19. There was a route which was Paresh Barua, as you know, is in China. There's a place called Ruili, and there was a transit route which was active for these arms to be supplied to the militants in Northeast, including the ones, as you're well aware, sir, that you commanded division there in Fall and that area, as also going towards Alpha. However, past 3, 4, 5 years, the government of India has been very proactive, and there have been measures which have undertaken. There have been operations which have been carried out by both the armies, which some of it was in the media as well. And this is one success story, Myanmar, which probably gets underplayed as far as the military diplomacy is concerned. And whole of nation approach, I think the government of India supported very well. And presently, sir, most of the groups for people who have been monitoring Myanmar, of Indian insurgent groups, have been dislocated from there. There is a sporadic arms flow which takes place, but government of Myanmar and the military, which is a decision maker as far as security is concerned, is much more sensitized and seized of our concerns, have taken actions accordingly. So I think if you see the neighborhood, Bangladesh is quite aware of and has taken action of our concerns regarding militancy, as also has Myanmar. So I think that way, probably the diplomacy and the military diplomacy has done a good job.
Thanks, Naveen. Gaurav, let me come to you. You've done a little analysis of how you look at China, what its vision is, where its economy, where its military forces are going over the next 20, 30 years. In your own assessment, what are the negatives? What is it that can sort of pull China back? Because it looks at a trajectory for itself and a quick growing trajectory. What are the minuses where we could see China not achieving its objectives and aims?
Thank you, sir, for the question. I'll try and make an attempt to give some kind of narrative to this. So, first of all, when we see the Xi Jinping becoming the president for life, it's a major onus on President Xi Jinping to prove himself that he is the right person, the core of the China's leadership, and he is there to take China to 2049, first 2021 when the CPC celebrates the 100 years. And thereafter, the way he has benchmarked, so he has put that he is the best man who can take the China there. Now, certain negatives, what I would like to highlight. So whatever happened on the Ladakh, sir, in Ladakh, it was not the manifestation of trying to grab a territory, what has been alluded earlier also. It was basically the type of things what happened. Like today, China wants to show, and in Taiwan remains the most important in the complete as far as the leadership is concerned. The unification of Taiwan with China, mainland China, remains the prominent issue. And in the scheme of things, DPP becoming the DPP, that is the Democratic Progressive Party, where Tsai Ing-wen has won the elections, and which is they were looking that the KMT is going to win the elections. It was a loss of face to China. What happened in COVID and the way they try to manipulate the WHO and the reports and everything, again, was the issue. When you talk about Hong Kong and the pro-democracy issue which is there, and China in his complete scheme of things feels that what I had just brought out, that any issue which can spread to Tibet or which can spread to Xinjiang, he is very, very sensitive to it. So anywhere where he is finding that the some kind of turbulence can lead to his main restive areas, is very sensitive. So the second part is what the stalemate issue was brought by General Panag. I would like to say that since he wants to achieve his China dream of becoming the world power, economic growth has to continue. Energy security has to have. So energy security is one thing. In case it gets sapped, it is not likely to make the economic growth. And the type of protest over the last 5 years have had taken place in China. In case of India, protest is not a major issue. But in case of China, where you have to declare that you are going to have a protest, those protest numbers have gone into lakhs. That means there is some kind of brewing which is taking place, which possibly the Chinese leadership is coming under a lot of questions. So I'll end here that any kind of restive turbulence in any of the regions in China, Taiwan remains one of the pertinent issues. Third is the economic growth and the energy security. So in any of the things where it finds that India is going to challenging its authority, that is the time it uses the pressure points of Ladakh or Eastern Arunachal or Ralph for that matter. So what I feel that China would continue to use these disputed areas as pressure points to put India into place. However, it has no intention of fighting because loss is more to China than to India. What the General Panak said, the state, if it's a stalemate, what happened in Doklam, what happened here, it's a stalemate, it is a loss for China. So any loss of face when it is looking to challenge USA and US Army or US forces, any kind of stalemate which is there, it is lost to China. Hence, China would never like to get into any war or major conflict with India in the near term, sir.
Okay, Gaurav, thank you. So we have only 5 minutes left. I'll just take 2 questions. I'll request one to General Panag and one to Mr. Ram Madhav. I'll just request if you could keep your answers to about 2 minutes so that we finish in time. So my first question is to General Panag. General Panag, sir, you talked about, for us to retain our control over Kailash range, make sure that, we keep our troops in those areas. Is there a fear, as people are saying, that it lead to some kind of LOCization, permanently keeping troops in such difficult areas comes with a huge economic cost? So is that worry there also? So if you could briefly sort of talk about it.
See, General Huda, the problem is there for both sides. It's if China forces us to maintain our troops on the LAC, so will China have to put troops. Because if our troops are there and China doesn't put troops, so it just merely uses its the differential military differential threat, then we can do the same thing to China. We can preempt it. It's a vast open space in eastern Ladakh. So it's both ways. In my view, the situation that is likely to develop will be somewhat like Sundaramchu. We have been 8 months into it. It may last a little longer. Sooner or later, with China not wanting a war, I entirely agree with Brigadier Brigadier Mishra, who said that China doesn't want war. China also doesn't want war. China wants to. The strategic aim was to have a settlement along the LAC on its terms, and when it gets it on its term, it means it has embarrassed India. It has undermined India, and this is something that we must not allow to ever take place. And even if we have to sit on the LAC for next 1 year, it's a small price to pay for stalemating China. Otherwise, China has achieved its aim. So we will have to gird up and bear the cost and bear it for the time being. I assure you that China will be equally keen after some time to agree to status quo ante, just to avoid sitting across us on the LOC, or to allow us to sit on the LOC and itself withdrawing so that we can do the same thing what it did to us.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Somewhat similar to this, Mr. Ram Madhav, let me take the last question to you. It appears today that both sides have very hardened positions. India says restoration of status quo ante, nothing else. From the statements that we see from the Chinese side, their ambassador, etc., they are saying this is our border. These are our traditional borders. We are not going to go away from this. Now, one option is, as General Panag has suggested, we sit there with 30,000, 40,000 troops, whatever is required. Our troops are battle hardened, they are well trained, and when push comes to shove, surely India can sort of afford whatever costs are there. Do you think, sir, there is a possibility of some change in approach? Do you think a resolution is at all possible? Your personal viewpoint that we can do something differently, both the countries?
Thank you, Jan Sahab. I will certainly say a few words about it, but also I wanted to say one important point to the Atmanirbharta in defense technology, about which General Shukla talked about. I think Atmanirbharta in defense tech is a long way to go. We have just begun. We are nowhere in deep tech areas. The biggest challenge the biggest difference between India and China is China's modernization technology drive was state-driven, whereas in India, we are asking our private entrepreneurs, private businessmen to come forward and do it. Takes time. In that, General Uda Sahab, the point that you made is the point that I make all the time in my party forum, that unless you give them the market like RCEP, you cannot have big tech companies coming here and doing Atmanirbharta in deep tech areas. That's just one point I wanted to add. Coming to this question of stand-off, I just have one very little disagreement with General Panag Sahab. I respect him a lot. My only point is our standing off with China at the border will bleed us more than China. China can probably afford standing at the border for 8 months, 10 months, but every day we are being bled economically. So ideally, we have to find a way to solve, address this standoff and end this standoff. But one good thing that is happening is that today we are insisting upon talking about the LAC. Now, engagement sans LAC is what we did after 88 for some time. We tried it out. But right now what we are doing is, no, let us engage, but first of all, engage and come to a conclusion on LAC. If this insistence of India that LAC must be at some point defined by our two countries, of course, what is the border and all can be decided. That is an issue that will take much longer time. But at least we should agree on what is our LAC. Now, this whole insistence, I believe, if it helps us in coming to that stage, which we missed in 1993, we all know about 93 Peace and Tranquility Agreement, we missed defining LAC. If this time we succeed in defining LAC after, say, 10 months or 1 year standoff, that will be a huge victory for India. Thank you, General.
So thank you very much. I have two questions which I'll answer myself, so that, we are now sort of running short of time. The first was by Suresh. What are the immediate political objectives of China? I think a lot has already been debated on it. His view is it not to bring India on the table with the single objective of CPEC? So this is also one part of it. But I think there are, as General Panag and others have pointed out, many sort of issues around the current inclusion. And by Mohit, we have been hearing about our army shifting focus from the Pakistan front to the China front. So yes, I think, and it's not recent. If you see in the last 10 years, all the formations, all the raisings have been all directed towards China. You see a lot of push, which has been given by the current government on infrastructure development on the China border. So the focus on China has been there. And obviously, after what has happened after May, you will find, additional and enhanced focus. So let me end here. Let me just thank all my panelists. Thank you so much, all of you, for your very, very wise comments, for sticking to time. And it will be my pleasure if I can, once again host you all on a panel. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, General Uda.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's very interesting, and I'm sure. Thank you, sirs. That was very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people have taken heed to your views and your opinions on the subject matter, which seems to be the most talked of, or the hottest topic, as we may call it today. Ladies and gentlemen, that being the last panel for the day, on behalf of the Military Literature Festival Association, we extend our heartfelt thanks to all the panelists who took out the time to be with us today and share their views and thoughts. We look forward to meeting up with all our spectators and viewers tomorrow, as we have very interesting lineup of discussions and panels.
We begin tomorrow with a scintillating book discussion on a book called Watershed 1967, India's Forgotten Victory over China by Prabal Das Gupta at 12 noon, followed by a panel discussion on the Quad, the emerging Indo-Pacific Naval Alliance at 2 p.m. And at 3 p.m., the panel discussion on self-reliance towards defense preparedness, followed by the India Army in Italy during World War II at 5 p.m. And lastly, at 6:30 p.m., we have Bollywood and nation building.
Thank you so much, and good night.
Good night.